One of the tools I've begun using in Ardour that I really like is called snapshots. So a snapshot is, as the name implies, a snapshot of a given session at a specific point in time. It's not frozen in time because you can actually open a snapshot and edit it like you would any other session file. But it is basically just a duplicate of your session file. So a bit of context here. Ardour is mostly a non-destructive DAW, which means that after you're done recording, after you're done tracking, or after you're done importing your source files from wherever, as you begin editing and mixing, your audio source files remain untouched. They remain the same. So as you slice regions, move them around, copy, paste, as you make mix decisions like adding EQ, plugins, automation, your audio source files remain the same. That means that your entire mix and edit is contained within a single source file for the most part. So when you ask Ardour to make a snapshot, it's just duplicating that one file for the most part. Easiest way to talk about this is to show an example in a session here and show a couple ways that I'm using snapshots. This is an in-progress mix of a live recording of an orchestra I made a couple weeks ago. And I'm already using snapshots here, and I'll show you how I'm doing it. So within the editor window, you can bring up snapshots by hitting Shift-L, which brings up this panel. This button up in the upper right does the same thing. Once you open this panel, it has 2 tabs, and each tab can change between a bunch of different lists, but among them is snapshots. So you can see for this session, I have 5 snapshots total. And so a bit about file structure. When you create a new session, so when I created this session, I named it 260602 Sound Ecologies. That's the ensemble name, and 0602, I recorded this on June 2nd. So when you tell Ardour to create a new session, it asks you where you want to save it and asks for a name. So once you give Ardour that name, then it creates a new folder in that location with that name. And then within that folder, it creates a single .ardour file with the same name, and that is your session file. And then as you create snapshots at any point in time for whatever reason, it just duplicates whatever your current snapshot is into a new one. And so you can see the other .ardour files here. There are a total of 5. Those are all my snapshots. They're just duplicate session files at a given point in time. And you can create a snapshot from any of the other snapshots. So one misconception I had about this, and it's very important, is that I think for the most part, Ardour treats all of these session files as equal. In other words, there's not like a default. And it's important because you have to know which snapshot you're currently on. If you use them, you have to be careful. And the reason, again, that that's important, Ardour remembers which snapshot you had open last for a given session. So again, let me get into an example and I'll show you how that works. As I said, this is an in-progress mix, and this little arrow shows which snapshot I have open. And so this I'm considering, that's what I named the session initially, so this I'm always going to consider my ongoing mix. But when I recorded this on June 2nd, the very next morning, I opened up the session and I created a snapshot so I could freeze this in time. And I called it original, and this was on June 3rd. So I'm going to double click on this and it will open it. I don't need to save because I haven't made any changes. The reason I created this snapshot, this is the session as I recorded it, exactly as it was recorded. I recorded directly into Ardour. So each new region you see here is actually a new take. I hit stop and play again, or stop and record again. So I really like having a record of this as it existed right the next morning, because if during my mix at some point I delete some regions that are unnecessary, then I say, wait a minute, didn't I record some room ambience, a couple minutes of room ambience before the performance? I can just open up my original and I'll find it there if I recorded it. So, and again, like all the markers, all of location markers, they're still going to be there. So that's a really handy historical record. So the place where this default concept comes into play is that, again, to reiterate what I said a minute ago, I thought that this first session with the original session name, or this first snapshot with the original session name, had some sort of elevated status, but it doesn't. So if you open up Ardour and ask it to open the session, it remembers which snapshot you had open. And that makes sense. It's just not what I thought would happen. So I'm going to pretend I'm opening Ardour from scratch. I'm going to hit Shift-Control-O to open recent. So here is that session, and because it has a little arrow here, it has snapshots. So my misconception was that if I opened up this one here, it would actually open up my default. That's not true. Ardour remembers what snapshot you had open, and if you open this, it opens whatever one you had open last time, which was original. So, important distinction to draw. Okay, so another use case. So that is kind of a historical record. And then as I began making the mix, as I removed certain things, I would just start making snapshots. It's not necessary, you know, they're kind of overkill, but I was learning how to use it. But here's a cool use case. So when I made this recording, I had two pairs of stereo mains. I had a spaced pair of omnis, and I had a pair of cardioids in ORTF. And I recorded 4 or 5 pieces that night, and I thought I'd leave it up to the composers as to which stereo pair they liked best on each piece. And so what I wanted to do was set up some basic, well, I need to open this here. Let's see. No, let's do this one. So I set up a rough mix with basic automation using the spaced pair of omnis, and I just duplicated the automation for the ORTF. So I have a basic mix here, and then I can use mixer scenes to switch between the omnis and the cardioids. So it's kind of like having 2 mixes, but I wasn't gonna maintain this structure. But once I created this such that I could A/B between a rough mix with either pair, then I saved that at that specific point in time. So that means that as I continue to mix in this, what I'm going to call the default session, I can still go back at any time, despite what changes I've made to the mix, and go back and exactly as it was, and then A/B these things. So again, it's kind of a historical record, which is kind of cool. Another way to use this is, it's kind of a, well, if you decide, hey, I want to make some automation changes, but I'm not sure that this is something I want to save, you could create a new snapshot. And so the way you create a snapshot, and I should have shown this a minute ago, but there are 2 ways to do it. And I'm actually going to go back to my in-progress mix here. And I should label this slightly differently, but so the way that you would create a new snapshot, you can either create a snapshot and keep working on the current version that you're on, or you can create a new snapshot and switch to the new one. So this is my in-progress mix. I'm going to create a new snapshot and switch to the new one. I'm going to call this 260624 test. So it's going to create that snapshot and switch to it. That was really quick. So now, if I want to, I can test some automation changes here. And I can do as much or as little as I want here. And then if I decide, I always have such trouble grabbing those. If I decide I don't like this, instead of doing a bunch of undos, I'm just going to, and I can even save this. If I save, Shift or Control S there, I can always just revert back by just going back to my in-progress mix. So whatever changes I tested there, they still exist. If I want to go back to them, I can do that. But it was non-destructive, which is kind of cool. If there's any complaint I have about the way snapshots work, this is a pretty minor one here. You notice I have a naming convention for not only session files, but for snapshots. And one of the reasons I've maintained that for the snapshots is there's only one sort to this window, and it's alphabetical by snapshot name. So the only way to keep these in any sort of order by date is to name them that way. So this was the first, and this was the most recent. So it's a minor thing, you just have to get used to it. I think for the most part, it's unlikely you're going to have 20 snapshots. 4 or 5 is probably a lot, so it's not such a big deal. So I would suggest, if you've never used snapshots, give them a try sometime. Be careful and know which snapshot you're using at all times, but they're a pretty nice tool to have.